Hello, welcome to Subjective Insights. Windy, squinty eyes in the wind. Today I'm going to talk about attitudes towards psychedelics within the spiritual crowd. What triggered this was a video I saw. It was a clip from an Under the Skin episode with Russell Brand and I think a guy called Jay Giotti. I think he's a famous guy on Facebook and YouTube. He does a lot of these videos where there'll be a kind of drama between a couple, and it'll end on a kind of emotional cliche like imagine the time when they're dead and how you'll miss them. They were talking about psychedelic use to promote spiritual practice and promote spiritual progress. And Jay Giotti was there talking about ayahuasca and how he did it before it was cool. Typical hipster. I think the underlying attitude behind what he expressed later on, where he says the danger is that people become dependent upon psychedelics for their spiritual progress and their spiritual attainment. There's a bit of evidence for that. There's no evidence for any form of physical dependency relating to the use of psychedelics. In one TED talk, this guy who had worked as an addiction counsellor for like a long time, he says there's three categories of dangers to drugs. You know, there is dependency, toxicity, and behaviour. And psychedelics like LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, DMT, and ayahuasca, and that they have no risk of dependency. Ayahuasca has a slight risk of toxicity due to the MAOI inhibitor within it, but the compound that's active within ayahuasca that causes a psychedelic effect, i.e. the DMT, is no risk of toxicity. So there are behavioural issues that can arise, and generally those behavioural issues are isolated to the experience, like you can have a bad trip. And for some people, I don't know the evidence behind this, they might be able to initiate a psychotic break, but I think that's down to the person's mental makeup. Like for me, I've had psychotic breaks in the past, not induced through the use of psychedelics. I don't promote or expound the use of psychedelics. And the only psychedelic I plan on using is ayahuasca in Peru, in a retreat, in a legal manner. But I think what got me through the psychotic break was my ability to stand upon my own 2 feet and disagree and trust my own opinion more than the men in the white coats who said that I was a problem and that they were giving me these medications. So I had an experience of being sectioned, and when I got out, I just stopped taking all the drugs and I got back into work and I was fine. In fact, I was better off after than I was before. You can look at some of my old videos to hear me talking about that. Anyway, this attitude, the reason why he says that is because he thinks it's better to be independent spiritually than it is to be dependent. And I think this comes from an attitude that's common in man now of being independent from nature, from reality. And it's this very attitude that I think is responsible for our raping and pillaging of the environment and destroying the environment. Nature is based upon a system of mutual interdependence. Even say the foxes go out and eat the rabbits, right? Then the foxes shit on the ground, and that produces more fertility within the ground, which produces more grass which the rabbits eat. You know, and eventually the fox dies and its rotten carcass feeds the ground, which in turn feeds the bunnies, which in turn feeds the foxes. The same with trees and their relationship towards fungi. When the tree's living, there is this mycelial network that connects the trees, and so the mycelium, the mushroom, the fungus, provides a service to the trees. It provides nutrients that the trees could not otherwise produce for themselves, and it saves the trees energy in having to create more root structure to find those nutrients, and it serves as a kind of informational network. And the trees in turn provide the fungi with sugars that the fungi can't produce itself. So nature is this system of mutual interdependence, but us humans, we have this tendency to cut ourselves off from it. So say instead of when one of us dies, leaving it to rot in the field or feed the ground or feed the animals, we bury it in this casket 6 feet underground, where it's going to take forever for that material to be recycled back into nature. This is typical of what we do. And so being dependent upon plants and nature for spiritual progress, it's like to say, I mean, we are dependent upon nature, but we're not mutually interdependent with it, because we just take and take and take. We're turning it all into unusable trash, and eventually we're shooting ourselves in the foot. But this attitude is now being translated into the spiritual domain, and it's like, why not be mutually interdependent with the planet and with the plants? It's like we eat fruits, and then we plant their seeds, and they grow trees, and we eat more fruit off them. It's a good cycle. It's why the plants have the properties they do, because they've grown up in conjunction with us. I mean, imagine the kind of magic mushrooms out on the plains that early man would have found. He would have picked them. That would have scattered spores all over the place, including on himself. And then he'd have wandered miles and miles and miles. And he was also keeping herds of cattle. And a lot of these mushrooms are what is known as coprophytic. That is, they grow in shit, and especially like buffalo and cow shit. And so it's a mutual dependency going on there. And it's like the spiritual practice, it's all about isolating yourself, being totally independent upon yourself. I just call quite foul on it. And the hypocrisy that's behind this, that they will use stuff to cure headaches, they will use stuff to cure illnesses, that they will use stuff that's exterior to themselves for all the vital and necessary aspects of life. So in a sense, what this attitude towards not using psychedelics for spiritual practice is it's a kind of spitting in the face of spirituality itself. It's like saying, sure, when it's important, when it's cancer, you know, I'll try anything. When it's a cold, when it's this, that, or the other, yeah, I'll use stuff. I'll take nutritional supplements to enhance my performance. But when it comes to spiritual progress and spiritual practice, oh no, mate, you just got to sit down and fucking focus on your breath. That's all you got. Yeah. It's just, I mean, I'm not promoting the use of these, by the way. I'm just pointing out the hypocrisy of it. I mean, another one is they'll drink alcohol. They'll happily drink alcohol, which is a solvent. You know, it's in the same class of compounds as glue and aerosol and all that kind of stuff. It's just, yeah. Goodbye.